We are going to focus on the second dimension of the person today, which is the psychological person. So earlier this week, we covered the biological self, which was talking about our bodies and the functionings related to our physicality. And now we're going to go more into the mind and the psyche and focus on the psychological person. So the specific focus is for today, because we're splitting the psychological person into two distinct lessons. But today we're just going to basically build the foundation of what's cognition, what is emotion, and some exploration around the concept of self. So if we're going to specifically define cognition, this is a term that's kind of the building block for all things psychology. Cognition is defined as our conscious or preconscious, so things that we're aware of or things that we might not necessarily currently be aware of. Those are both the conscious and the preconscious thinking processes. So these are the mental activities of which we are aware of or can become aware of with probing. So if you kind of look at this triangle flowchart of cognition, you kind of start at your current situation, current functioning, current viewpoint, and you're taking information in from your environment. So you're observing, you're listening, you're hearing, you're experiencing. And the next step is your brain starts to synthesize or process what that information could mean. And so what we'll find in the next couple slides, sometimes our brains don't necessarily synthesize information in a way that is factual. It might feel factual to the individual person, but it might not be factual to someone outside of themselves. So our brains can either synthesize or process the information in a healthy, accurate way, or it might be processed in a distorted way. And based on all of the processing and thinking around it, the next step would be to formulate a plan of action from the info. So if you are walking through the mountains, you happen to see a bear in front of you, you're going to synthesize that information of like, oh crap, I'm in danger. I am going to get eaten. Your plan of action might be to run away from the bear. Now that actually might be a really bad example because I think technically, according to survivalists, you don't run away from a bear. But for the sake of the flow, let's just pretend that actually is the correct plan of action. But in real life, don't take my advice because I think I might have gotten you killed. So yes, that is cognition and kind of how that happens. It can be intentional thinking. It could be just gut reaction. So you might literally, in that situation with the bear, you might not sit and think, oh, it's a bear. This bear is going to eat me. I should run. You might have some of that unconscious fight or flight response where you just immediately run because your brain has processed and synthesized the information so quickly that the plan of action is implemented immediately without thinking. So some key points in understanding what cognition is a key element is what we call a belief. So it's ideas that we as the individual hold to be true. This is a very subjective piece of information, and so beliefs aren't always exactly those concrete, like 2 + 2 = 4. We believe that to be true, but it's universally held to be true. Beliefs are more of how we've developed kind of our worldview, and it's just based off our own personal assessment of a situation or an idea. We're determining if it's true or false based on how we have experienced the world. So erroneous beliefs or beliefs that are in error frequently contribute to distress or interpersonal problems. And so if I am looking over at somebody and they're giving me a really dirty look, my belief is that they hate me and they don't like me. Well, they might have just been caught in a bad moment or thinking about something different that has nothing to do with me. Well, it's caused me a lot of distress because of my erroneous belief that they didn't like me, and now I'm upset, where in actuality, there's no merit to that belief at all. So the key thing to understand is that beliefs are developed out of how we experience and assess our world around us. So the book went through a lot of different cognitive theories and theories of cognition, and the root and the commonality of all of them is that they believe thinking, not emotion, should be the primary focus of any sort of intervention or approach to looking at behavior or modifying behavior. So a really, really popular modality in therapeutic settings is called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's one that most people who practice at an individual level will be trained on at some sort of level. It's really looking at how people think in their thoughts, and so there's that cognitive part, and how those thoughts influence behavior. And if they're distorted thoughts, how might that distort behavior, and how can you modify the thoughts to improve or change maladaptive behavior? And so it's a very concrete, rational, step-by-step, pulling out a lot of actual thoughts versus looking and exploring the emotions around the thoughts. It's really looking at correcting the cognitive piece of the brain versus dealing with emotional associations with events. We are going to talk in a couple slides about distorted thinking, but I'm going to go through a couple more vocab pieces before we get there. So a couple key terms that the book outlined, and it is really helpful to understand when you're thinking about the psychological self, is that everybody develops what we call a schema. And so schema is very similar to a worldview. A worldview is actually a schema. We talk a lot about worldview here because we, at Kuiper, because we operate under the Reformed worldview and the world Reformed perspective. And so basically what these are is they're an internalized representation of the world. So something that each individual creates meaning around the world themselves. And they're ingrained. And so it kind of builds our like value system, or just basic like general operations in the world. Like a schema could be like, I know it's unsafe to walk across the East Beltline because I might get hit by a car. So we know that there's like some things you can predict or outcomes that might occur based on behavior and actions. And we form our experiences and our behaviors around those. It helps us with thought, action, problem solving. If we know fast cars hitting us hurt, we're going to avoid walking in front of them. And so when we have our schemas in the world, we have two possible responses to new situations that enter into our schemas. So we can either assimilate our schemas or we can accommodate our schemas. So assimilation is where you're responding to your experiences and incorporating them into your already built schema. So if your schema tells you that when you see a furry animal with 4 legs, with a wagging tail and a lapping tongue, that creature is a dog. And so if a child sees a new breed of dog that they've never accounted for or never seen or experienced, they're still able to attribute that as a dog based on the schema they've developed. They know what other dogs look like, and they've assimilated this new creature correctly into the category of a dog as well. And so if your experience with, let's say, a child has all female teachers, they've had a female teacher for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and they've all been wonderful experiences and they've really loved them, their schema might identify that female teachers are really kind and wonderful. And so when they go into 4th grade and they find out they have a female teacher as well, they might be excited because they're fitting female teachers into their schema of female teachers are being nice. They might not know this person, they might not have any experience with them, but they're going to create a sense of safety already established in their mind because of experiences they've had before. So accommodation would be when you encounter something that doesn't necessarily fit into your existing schema. So it's challenging the equilibrium and the norm of what your world is. So if you're going back to the example of a child who's able to identify a different breed of a dog, it's still a dog. An accommodation to that schema would be if they saw a 4-legged creature, they don't assume it's a dog. So if they see a horse, they're able to accept and incorporate that a 4-legged creature who has a mane and a tail and is tall and giant hooves is a horse, not a dog. And so they have accommodated their schema of 4-legged creatures being dogs to be more expansive and broaden that, okay, a four-legged creature can also be a horse. And so if you go back to the example where a student has had all nice female teachers, and then all of a sudden in fourth grade, they now are getting a male teacher. This is a new experience. Accommodating your schema could mean, oh, I'm assuming that he is nice as well, because even though he's a male, I can still accept that he might be nice too, creating a sense of safety. Or if it's difficult if you're looking just to assimilate and now you have a new experience, you might assume that the male is bad because he's not a nice female teacher. And so there's difficulty in accommodating a new element into your schema. So those are kind of how all of those cognition and processing works. All right. So cognitive theories are highly rational in their approach to human behavior. So it tries to move further away from some of that subjective insight and the subjective processing. We often kind of attach subjective to more emotion-based thinking. So the rational, objective thought processes are kind of where cognitive theories are based out of. And so I talked a little bit in the previous slide about that equilibrium. And so children, especially, but adults and humans in general, really have this inherent desire to maintain some equilibrium or balance in their life. So when your schemas are being challenged and you can't accommodate new information or new changes into your existing schema, that is what kind of triggers anxiety, unless we're able to figure out how to accommodate them. So if the child finds out that they're having a male teacher in fourth grade that is throwing off the equilibrium and what they've experienced and what they've known for the past however many years in school, they have the choice then. They might experience some anxiety then because it's an unknown and they don't know how to interpret the new information of a male teacher. So until they're able to accept that or process and implement that a male teacher could be nice as well, they're gonna be sitting in this like ick of instability that's going to trigger some anxiety and some discomfort until the child is able to kind of accept that, oh, a teacher who is a male can also be nice. So we're always looking as individuals to experience and maintain that status quo equilibrium feeling. So there's these common cognitive distortions. So if you have ever gone to therapy, your therapist or provider might have thrown out some of these cognitive distortions. There's lots of different ones, and typically what happens is an individual is looking at situations through a distorted lens. And so this chart right here kind of goes through some different ones. I'm going to make a specific video just looking at cognitive distortions because it's really good to kind of understand and even identify in ourselves some of the common cognitive distortions that we experience. So I'm going to flesh this slide out in a separate video because it is good information. It's very practical information as well. Yes, so that is all of the content on cognition, but look for the supplemental video of exactly what these common cognitive distortions look like, because that will kind of help build a little bit more understanding and give us the opportunity to apply some of this to different situations.